Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Burke, and I will be moderator today for the Schiller Institute Panel 5, Shaping the Earth's Next 50 Years. I'm pleased to introduce our musical offering. Martin Kapteyn will play Franz Schubert's Impromptu in G-flat. Thank you. Well, we just concluded the last panel with a comment from Helga Zepp-LaRouche about the need for a rapidly growing youth movement centered on LaRouche's ideas. And so I'm very pleased to be here with you for this panel, which will feature some 8 contributions from our youth members. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Megan Dobrodt, U.S. President of the Schiller Institute.
Lyndon Larouche's decades-long, and I would argue still very much ongoing, intervention into U.S. politics, world politics, and world history was always accompanied by and very much spearheaded by a youth movement in the 1960s and 70s first, and then in the wake of 9/11 and the launching of the Iraq War. And we were lucky enough to get a firsthand taste of that in the videos we saw on the last panel. What was clear to Lyndon Larouche, and I know this because he told us repeatedly, was that because the current leadership was partly, or more often entirely dysfunctional, morally or otherwise, in order to reverse course, in order to put the next 50 to 100 years on a secure footing, we needed to develop a new generation of leadership which would not make the same mistakes as their parents' and grandparents' generations. A new generation that wouldn't go along to get along. A new generation that would be competent to discover and implement policies that could lead civilization out of this mess. A generation that would take up the mission of qualifying itself to lead. How? The first qualification of leadership is to know how to know that something is true. Not to have memorized the correct facts to pass the examination, not to repeat what the sanctioned authorities say is the right answer, and not to parrot bits of information collected on the internet, but to really know how to know that something is true in your own mind. That is the necessary standard for political leadership. In order to develop that, Lyndon Larouche laid down an educational program centered around working through, as a social process, as a cadre, the most fundamental discoveries in physical science, those of Plato, Cusa, Kepler, Leibniz, Gauss, and Riemann. Now, that didn't mean reading the Wikipedia articles about those individuals, but he assigned us and the new generation to work in depth through the original works, to rediscover, to relive the original discovery in your own mind, and to just rediscover things for yourself. That is how you know that something's true. On this panel, you'll see the fruits of that work, or some of the fruits of that work, in a new generation of leadership, of the beginnings of a third Larouche youth movement. And hopefully, you'll begin to get an idea of what the standard of leadership for the next 50 to 100 years must be.
And now we'll hear from Lyndon Larouche.
You stay up at night, and you take these sighting positions of the sunrise, the sunset, and the midday position, and you observe to which constellations and stars do these observations correspond? And so on stone, like these megalithic constructions which were made, dot the Brittany and Ireland and Britain, typified by Stonehenge. So you simply mark by day, and you can count the days by the sun, not by lunacy. You count the number of days. In 5 years, you discover that in the cycle of the advance and regression of the position of the sun, and man would obviously use the equinox for this dating of the calendar, that there are 365 and a quarter days approximately in one cycle called 1 year. And then you discover by the same means other cycles. A beast can't do that, nor can a liberal. Only a human being can do that. And the earliest known cultures, dating 6, 7, 8, 10,000 BC, the earliest known cultures developed a solar astronomical calendar, which is more accurate than anything that existed up into the 19th century, and also which far surpassed anything created from the founding of Sumer and Ur in the biblical land of Mesopotamia, which is a biblical fraud, written by Babylonians who rewrote the old Jewish writings under orders of Babylonian Chaldean priests. So man is capable of this, capable of reason, capable of seeing lawful ordering in the universe and using the knowledge of that lawful ordering to reform and change his own behavior. And in this way, by making reason rather than Smith's immediate and original instincts, bestial qualities, the characteristic of human behavior, by so doing, we achieve what we call scientific and technological progress. We not only increase man's power over nature by bending man's will to the law of reason in the universe, by making the mind not the bestial aspect of humanity, the personality and the value, the identity, the person. We not only increase the human population, but we elevate the possible moral condition of mankind if we don't have oligarchs to ruin the process, usurers, Phoenician bankers and the like. Then we begin to discover what is the good. What is the good? The good is the power of mind to recognize a principle of reason as the lawful ordering of the entire universe. To recognize that a process of development is associated with this. And to recognize that the continuation and acceleration of the takeover of the personality by elaborated reason is the good. The elevation of the moral condition of mankind in correspondence with this principle and in actions congruent with that principle is the good. Such was the principle of Solon at Athens. Such was the principle of Platonic Academy, the concept of the Republic, and such were the principles of the founding of the modern European Republic by the writings of St. Augustine. That is the good. And the Republic is the only natural condition of mankind. And it was proven by Dante and his followers that the only natural form of republic is a totally sovereign nation state, not subject to the IMF or the World Bank or UNO, a sovereign nation state, a republic which is based upon the employment of a literate form of common language by its citizens. A literate form of language which imparts to those citizens, as in the words of Shelley, the power of imparting and receiving profound and impassioned conceptions respecting man and nature. Conceptions organized in the form of reason. The form of reason as exemplified by the Socrates of Plato's dialogues. That is the natural condition of mankind. All other features of a natural condition of mankind pertain to the development of the republic and the citizen rather than as to its form.
Thank you, Lyndon Larouche. Our first speaker, presenter on this, will be Mike Campbell. His presentation is titled Leaving Plato's Cave.
Ideas hold power and are a driving force for the universe. I want to found this talk on the thinking of Lyndon Larouche from the early 2000s. As all literate adults know, the difference between the relationship to nature by mankind and that of any lower animal species lies in the ability, unique to the individual human mind, of discovering experimentally validatable discoveries of universal physical principles. By a validated discovery of universal physical principle, we mean something which cannot be seen, heard, smelt, or touched by organs of the senses, but an idea, as Plato defines ideas, by means of which man's power to exist in and over the universe is measurably increased. Now, to go to where Lynn is pointing, I want to take us on a vacation to the North Pole. Welcome to summer above the Arctic Circle, where the sun never sleeps. So, is the sun moving, or are we? Forget what you know and ask, how can I tell? Could you prove it? How about now? Could you prove what you think you know well enough to teach another human being? You know, you can create a similar effect. One time I was stopped at a stoplight uphill, and a car next to me went, and I was paying attention, and I startled myself into thinking I was rolling backwards. But this view from Earth and the stars at night, this is the starting point for Plato's allegory of the cave, in which prisoners are trapped in a cave, staring at a wall, stuck viewing shadows being cast from behind them. According to what they had seen or heard on that wall, the prisoners began naming these objects of their reality. So, based on the axiomatic belief that these shadows were objects themselves, Plato imagined a culture amongst the prisoners. Whoever was best at depicting the shadows, was best at remembering the order in which things passed, and thus was most able to predict what would come next, he would be the most honored and revered amongst the other prisoners. The state of astronomy in 1600, when Kepler was making his discovery, was just like in the cave. Astronomers sought to predict the movement of the sun, the moon, the planets, by creating astronomical models. The creators of the reigning models of Kepler's time, people may have heard these names in school. You know, Ptolemy, Copernicus, and the one that people may not know is Bra, who he owned his own island observatory, had the most accurate observational data, and Kepler had worked there. This is Ptolemy's model, where the Earth is at the center, the sun is going around the Earth, and Mars is orbiting that circle on a circle. Right? Right, that second circle is called an epicycle. And if you look at the bottom right, you can see how Mars and the Sun would appear from Earth at a given time. Copernicus had a sun-centered model. It was basically identical to Ptolemy's, but inverse. And Bra had the most complex. We went back to an Earth-centered model, and the Sun orbited the Earth, and all the other planets orbited the Sun, which was orbiting the Earth. Now, all these models share a common fundamental axiom. An axiom founded on an Aristotelian idea that Earth is thought to be dirty, corruptible, and imperfect, and totally separate from the heavens, which were perfect and could be no other way. Being perfect, the celestial bodies were believed to move only in perfect circles and unchanging speed. But here's a catch. If you watch the bottom of the right there, observably, the motion is clearly not uniform. And Mars even appears to move backwards at times. And this directly challenges that idea of perfection. And as the observational data got increasingly accurate, instead of adjusting their own thinking, the perfect models just got more complex over time. That's why the epicycle was created. That perfect circle on a perfect circle, that was used both to explain the variable speed and the appearance of backwards motion. They also invented something called the mean sun and the equant, and these were yet another way of coping. And this is funny because, I'm sure everybody's been in a political argument where somebody can continuously manipulate whatever facts are presented, and no matter what, they're able to fit it in, rationalize, and justify their belief. This is a lot like that, but over 2,000 years. And this was enabled to go on because the modelers did get better at predicting the moving stars. And just like for our friends in the cave, being able to predict the next observation better than the other guy, that's what mattered most. That's what filled your bread box. Meanwhile, Kepler was not interested in making mere predictions, but he did create a model in imitation of the ancients. He called it his vicarious hypothesis, and he broke it intentionally. Adrian will fill this out more, but for my purpose, it was based on circles, it was much more accurate, and in breaking his model based on circles, he broke that cultural axiom. See, Kepler could not rely on preconceived axioms to make a new discovery. Kepler's intention was different. He looked for a cause in the motions. When challenged by paradox, he asked, why is it so and not any other way? He hypothesized. He hypothesized and uncovered the first principle of universal gravitation, which is a physical cause of the motion, something that the mere models lacked. His imagination took the climb out of Plato's cave and into the sunlight. He had every faith that as a human being, his mind was imbued with reason, and therefore he could freely imagine and hypothesize the actual nature of the universe. But again, aren't you and I just like Aristotle professed, trapped by imperfection and limited to mere logical deductions from sense perceptions? No. And this shift in perspective embodied in Kepler, this typifies the Golden Renaissance of which he was a part. Ideas shape history, not events. Before the Renaissance, you had a miserable dark age. You had the Black Plague that killed over 1/3 of the population. And the shift came when Nicholas of Cusa organized the Eastern and Western churches at the Council of Florence and affirmed that every human being contains a divine spark and has the right to develop it and to participate in creation itself. This was a source of boundless cultural optimism, the best traditions of which went across the Atlantic and became the American Revolution. And because America is an idea first, not a state, a designed, self-perfecting process for a more perfect union. Yet, where are we today? Economic collapse, basking in an escapist entertainment while the government we're responsible for commits mass genocide and starts World War III? Knowing where we came from, how did we become the new face of empire? History, time, is not what it seems it is. Time passes and growing older is guaranteed, but growing up is not. Is this what 250 years of a more perfect union should look like? Here's a joke from Lyndon Larouche from 2004. This is just after the Iraq War had begun. One variety of dog, my family's Great Pyrenees, does not recognize the image of a dog on a television screen, but our West Highlands Terrier will respond to that same TV screen image by flying into a rug-chewing fit, like President George W. Bush, at the flicker of a dog's or a dog-like animal's image on the TV screen. Sense experience is our interpretation of the effect of an unseen universe which impinges upon our body's sense perceptual organs. People may remember, all it took was Colin Powell on the TV screen waving a magic vial, and a mob whipped up in a reactionary state around 9/11 cheered on the coalition of the willing. We are certainly back in the cave, divining shadows off a dimly lit wall. But Plato's cave is really a political organizing tale. After ascending out of the cave, what would happen if you went back in to help the prisoners? The question asked at the beginning of the dialogue, Plato's Republic, is there and what is the principle of universal justice? This can be answered by reliving Plato's dialectic and Kepler's discovery, which are pathways to know truth, proving that the lawfulness of mind and that of the physical universe are in correspondence and cohesion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Up next, we have Adrian Pearl. Why and to what extent may a false hypothesis yield the truth?
Hi, thank you all. I'm gonna pick up right where Mike left us off with this question: why and to what extent may a false hypothesis yield the truth? Now, this was a question posed by Johannes Kepler, the astronomer, 17th century astronomer, to readers of his book, New Astronomy. And he poses this question in chapter 21, right after he had completely demolished the existing astronomical theories of his day and his predecessors, which Mike told us about a bit. And I like to think that, this chapter was inspired by a story of Kepler sitting here with his benefactor, Emperor Rudolf, who was very interested in his work. And the emperor asks him, he says, "Professor Kepler, how did your predecessors come up with these theories, these kind of wacky theories with all these circles and circles within circles?" And Kepler says, "Okay, I'll try to tell you. Before I tell you my own theory about how the solar system actually works, I'll tell you how they came up with these theories." And the answer is basically that they were trying to come up with a model that would simulate the truth. So he says, in Kepler's words, "The fact that the result the result meaning of these existing hypotheses, the fact that the result appears identical to the senses does not prove that the as yet unknown true hypothesis and the false one assumed by us have an identical result. For there can be a very small discrepancy which the senses do not perceive. There are, however, occasions upon which a false hypothesis can simulate truth within the limits of observational precision with respect to the longitude. These I shall now demonstrate. So he's saying even if we have incredibly precise measurement technology, we still might not approach the truth just by taking measurements, making observations, and matching patterns. And I want to go through just sort of the core of his demonstration, because I think even though it's ostensibly an astronomical demonstration, what Kepler's really doing here is giving us a lesson in what is knowledge. How do you know that you actually know something? And he's in fact bringing us back to Plato in the cave. So he starts out by saying that just looking at the planet traveling across the sky through the zodiac throughout the year, it would be reasonable to come up with a hypothesis where the planet is simply orbiting in a uniform circle. And we can start off with that as our first hypothesis. So that's what I have here, where he'd be this planet. Kepler observed Mars. This kind of looks like Saturn, but that'll do. And he's saying we start with this circular model, uniform circle. And then the problem that these astronomers ran into is they started introducing data into their process. So they said, let's just look at two observations. And when you start looking at data, it actually only takes two observations if you know the year length, this planet's year length. With just two observations, you can figure out that the planet can't possibly be orbiting the sun in a perfect uniform circle. Because you can, if you know the year length, in this case we have the actual observations I've plotted here on the inside of this ring, and then the model's predictions are plotted on the outside. So we can see here that the uniform circular model expects the planet to have traversed almost half the way around the zodiac, because about half of the planet's year has passed. But the actual observations show that it's only moved, maybe 40% of the way around. So this uniform orbit doesn't work. So then Kepler says, so what did these astronomers do? What did they do to sort of fix these broken models? And the answer is they started coming up with these quantitative metaphysical inventions. And the first one was called the eccentric, which is where you say, okay, the planet's not actually orbiting the sun. It's orbiting a mysterious point in space that we can't observe, it's invisible, but we're just going to say it's orbiting that point near the sun and not the sun exactly. And once you have that, you can kind of pick and choose where you think the orbit should be. And then once you move the orbit around, the observations stay in place, but the predicted alignments between the planet and the sun change with respect to the different times around the year. And if you tune this model perfectly, you pick the perfect location of your eccentric, then you can get it to be so that both of your observations line up perfectly. So that's sort of the first step in this process that Kepler's predecessors went down. And then he says, but then they decided, let's look at a few more observations, right? Just two is not enough. So let's have 4 observations. And then you see the model breaks again, because our simple eccentric model can get these 2 observations, predict them more or less perfectly, but now we're overshooting, or we're undershooting on a few of these predictions, so we're not predicting where these observations are going to be. So what did his predecessors do then? Well, he says it's actually very simple. They just invented another metaphysical construct, and this one was called the equant. And the equant is it's a little bit harder to get your head around. It's sort of like the clock of the model. And so now what we're saying is that the planet is orbiting a point near the sun, but it's orbiting in such a way that its angular velocity around this equant point is uniform. So there's a point of uniformity, and there's another point that it's actually orbiting around. And as a sort of heuristic, you can see that if the planet is near the equant, it moves very slowly, and if the planet's far from the equant, it moves quite fast. And that's sort of how the equant works. And if you now have these 2 degrees of freedom with respect to the orbit, you can start tuning things again, and you can find the perfect location. And if you fiddle with this enough, you'll get it to basically match these 4 observations. So now that means our model's better, right? We're predicting the data. We're matching our model's predictions match our observations. So we must be getting close to the truth, right? Well, Kepler says, if you keep adding data, you're just going to break your model again, assuming you're going down this epistemological path. And you're just going to end up with, maybe smaller errors, but you're not actually really getting anywhere. And how does he know that? Well, we could play games like this all day where we come up with different constructs and get more precise fits to our data sets. The next sort of invention that these astronomers came up with was called the epicycle, where, as Mike discussed, where now you not only have an actual orbit point and an equant, but now we're saying that the planet sort of is off-center as well. So it's orbiting a point that's itself orbiting a point that's sort of near the sun and has this equant. So now we have these sort of 3 characters we've invented, and it's sort of like a choose your character video game style where we're trying to build this model that can perfectly fit this data. So we could do this. We could keep tuning things. We could decide what the speed should be and the orientation and everything. But Kepler says you're really not getting anywhere. Not only are you not finding the truth, you're actually digging yourself deeper into Plato's cave. To put it exactly in his words, I think he puts it quite well. He says, this mutual tempering of various influences, meaning the influences of the different constructs, the equant, the eccentric, causes one error to compensate for another, brings the calculation within the limits of observational precision, and makes it impossible to perceive the falsity of this hypothesis, of this specific hypothesis. And so this sly courtesan cannot gloat over the dragging of truth, a most chaste maiden, into her bordello. Any honest woman following the lead of this prostitute would stay closely in her tracks, owing to the narrowness of the streets and the press of the crowd, and the stupid, bleary-eyed professors of the subtleties of logic, who, unable to tell a candid appearance from a shameless one, judge her to be the prostitute's maidservant. So I think Kepler is trying to tell us something here. And I won't comment any more on this, but so let's talk about how we know that this sort of like these constructs are not actually getting us closer to the truth. So what does the truth look like? Well, let's start by looking a little bit at Kepler's hypothesis, which he comments on various points throughout his book. I'll share what I think is a very brief and eloquent summary from the introduction. He says, the true theory of gravity is a mutual corporeal disposition among kindred bodies to unite or join together. Thus, the earth attracts a stone much more than the stone seeks the earth. Heavy bodies are drawn towards the center of the world, not because it is the center of the world, but because it is the center of a kindred spherical body, namely the earth. So, one thing to point out very quickly here, there is no geometric term in this hypothesis, in this theory, because it's not a geometric theory. It is a physical theory, which means there is no fixed geometry. It's not like everything has to be in a circle or a circle within a circle. It's just a physical theory that describes how bodies which have mass interact with one another, and it applies to the entire universe. So I can't show you a visualization of this theory because it would have to encompass the entire universe of all corporeal mass. But what I can do is I can show you a simulation, a 2-body simulation of how 2 bodies interact with each other given this theory of gravity. And these could be, as in the previous demonstration, the planet and a sun, or it could be, like here I've shown you a spacecraft and a planet. And we can see that in this simulation, which is more of a closer to a Keplerian physical simulation, it's not about the fixed geometry or the fixed parameters. It's about measurable physical characteristics of the bodies, like their mass, their relative velocity, and their distance, that determine the relationship between them. And we can see that under certain circumstances, the orbit looks quite similar to a circle. If I were to increase their mass ratio to say the planet is heavier relative to the spacecraft, then we get a completely different relationship. And now we can see more clearly that the orbit is actually elliptical. And this is known today as one of Kepler's laws. But again, what's really important here is not the shape. It's not that the planet orbits in an ellipse. It's the relationship and the fact that this has to do with the actual physical characteristics. And then, of course, you know, what's so powerful about this hypothesis is that unlike the models of the predecessors of Ptolemy and Copernicus, et cetera, it's not just about coming up with a theory of how one planet orbits. This physical hypothesis applies to all sorts of different situations. So if we were to imagine a spacecraft approaching a planet with the right trajectory and the right ratio of mass and the right, you know, velocity, then there is no orbit. The orbit completely breaks down, and you can actually sort of just use the planet as a sort of gravity boost. So it's not all about what is the shape, or even is there an orbit. It's about, what he's doing here is he's inventing physics. And that invention of that hypothesis is why Lyndon Larouche placed Kepler on what's called his narrow path, which I think we'll hear more about later, which is going to be very interesting. So I want to leave you now with one final quote from Kepler, which has to do with sort of not so much how to distinguish. I think these sort of principles get at how to distinguish a true hypothesis from a false one. But then there's the question of where does the true hypothesis come from? How do you actually go about finding the truth? And for Kepler, there's no question that in order to discover a true universal physical principle, you have to start with the belief that the universe actually has physical principles that are there waiting for us to discover them. And for this, it comes down to, for Kepler at least, it comes down to the fact that the universe has these principles is, you know, an unmistakable, is unmistakable proof of some kind of intelligent design. So I'll just leave you with this quote. And he's referring to Mars here as sort of a hero who he's faced in battle and captured. And he says, "For he is not to be held without honor among us, whom the eternal architect of this world and the father of heavens and humans in common located in the front lines of the visible bodies, so that he might serve as a soldier for the glory of his creator through his perennial course through the ethereal regions, and so that he might raise human minds, lulled to sleep by a deep somnolence, from the slanderous reproach of idleness and ignorance, train them by his own sorties, and provoke them forcefully to carry out investigations in the heavens for the praise of their creator." Thank you all, and I just want to add one more point that this entire presentation is publicly available online. You can find it at this link or this QR code if you want to play around with the simulations or anything. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Adrian. So I want to introduce people to the international Larouche youth movement. And one of the key organizers in Mexico for that process across various campuses in different parts of Mexico has been Carolina Domínguez. She's been a lead figure in organizing our international youth dialogues with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. And I welcome you to see her presentation here. Why We Aren't Beasts, What Nobody Told You.
Actividades en las universidades, instituciones, en las calles. Es un trabajo con
organizing universities, institutions with young people who are making decisions. I would like to address this issue. Why are we not beasts? What no one has told you. And to
quiero presentarles
address
dos
this, I
personajes
would like to introduce you
que son
to two
fundamentales para
people
nuestro trabajo con
who
ustedes.
are fundamental to our
El
work.
primero
The first one
es Vladimir Bernatsky, que es un
is Vladimir
ruso
Vernadsky. He's a Ukrainian Russian
nace en
chemist.
1863 y su vida realmente es muy
He
interesante porque
was
da una
born
una
in
pelea científica y en cierto sentido política para
he
poder
launched
desarrollar
a scientific and to a certain
Rusia,
degree
a la
political
Rusia, en ese entonces
fight to
el
develop
Imperio Ruso.
Russia.
En esta perspectiva de Bernatsky,
In
él
Vernadsky's
creó
perspective,
diferentes documentos.
he
Por ejemplo, a los
developed
26
various
trabajó con
documents. For instance, at
sobre
26 years of age,
la
he worked with Pierre
investigación de
Curie
la simetría.
on the investigation of symmetry.
Escribió documentos,
He
muchos documentos en realidad, no
wrote
tengo tiempo para
documents, many
todos
of
los
them, which I
documentos,
don't have time to list
uno de los más
completely, but one of the most
importantes
important
es la
ones
necesidad de estudiar los minerales
was
radioactivos del interior.
about the need to study
Uno
radioactive
es
materials and their isotopes. He
CESTN,
founded
que es la Comisión para el
CESTN,
Estudio de
which
las
is the
Fuerzas
Committee
Naturales
to study
en Rusia.
natural
Porque
forces in
Bernatsky
Russia,
estaba
because
muy comprometido con
Vernadsky
el hecho
was
de que
very
la
committed
capacidad
to the
productiva
fact that
de las
productive
naciones estaba en
power
función
of nations
también
is
de
a
los
function
recursos
as
minerales que
well
tenían.
of any of
Cómo
the
esto debía ser
mineral resources available, and
investigado por
how
medio de
this
institutos,
should be
sobre todo en
researched
Rusia.
by
También fundó
institutionally,
el
particularly
Instituto
in
de
Russia.
Radio,
He also
el libro
founded the
La
Radio
Biosfera, que es un poco de lo que voy a
Institute,
hablarles, es un
and
libro
he
muy
finished the
importante que
book,
cualquier
the
estudiante,
Goddess, which I will be
cualquier
speaking
persona
about,
en
and
general
a
debe
very
leer
important
para
book that
comprender
students and
esta
people in
idea de
general
que no
should
somos meras
read
bestias.
to understand this idea
Propone la
of why
creación
we are
del
not mere
Biosphere,
beasts.
que es un laboratorio de
He
bioquímica,
proposes the
y es
creation of
un
the
componente que se llama
BioHES,
pensamiento
which is a
científico como
biochemist,
fundamento de
and
la
he
humanidad.
has
Algunos niveles
another work
revolucionarios que es
on
muy importante
common
para el
scientific
trabajo que
observations
nosotros
on
hacemos de
building
la formación de los jóvenes
planetariums, and it's a
en
very
el
important
tema de la
item that we
economía, en el
use
tema
to
de
educate youth
la
on
ecología y del tema
the
realmente de
economics
cuál es
and
nuestro papel como seres
ecology.
humanos.
That is, what is our true role as human
Bernatsky
beings?
plantea
Vernadsky,
conceptos como qué es la materia viva,
um,
que son todos los organismos
he
presentes en la Tierra en
postulates
un momento dado,
ideas such as what is
y el
live
bienestar de esos organismos.
matter, which is what exists on
Quiero
the
dejar
earth
este
and
concepto planteado y lo
at a
podemos
certain moment.
desarrollar más
I would like
en
to
las preguntas.
sketch out this
Pero es
concept. We can
importante
develop it further
tener
in the questions, but
permanente este
it
concepto
is
de materia viva.
important to
También tenemos el concepto de
keep
los
this
tres
concept of
espacios-cuerpos
life
que están
matter
interactuando en un bloque de
in
tiempo
mind. And we also need
significativo.
to keep in mind
La
the
materia
various phase
inerte, como
spaces
son
that
las rocas
interact.
sólidas,
Inert
gases, líquidos,
matter, such as
minerales, la
rocks, gases,
biosfera o la
liquids,
materia viva y
and
la
minerals, the
noósfera o la
biosphere,
esfera
which is
gravitacional,
live material, and
la
the
capacidad,
noosphere,
la
which
capacidad
is the sphere
creativa
of
del ser
the
humano.
human mind and the
Después tenemos
creative
algo que Bernatsky
capability of the human
llama
mind.
la
Then we have
interacción
something
biogénica de átomos,
which
que
is
son
what
este
Vernadsky calls the
bioenergético material que se
biogenetic
mantiene por medio de la respiración, la
vibration,
alimentación
which is
y
maintained
la
through
reproducción de la materia viva.
respiration
Estos tres
and leads
conceptos
to the
de
resolution
espacio-espacio
of
interactuando
matter.
nos
These
dan una
three
idea de cómo es que funciona la
ratios
biosfera en su totalidad
of the
y
interaction
cómo
of
esto por
phase
encima
spaces tell us how the
superior
biosphere
a la biosfera existe
exists
la noósfera.
in
Esa es la
reality, and
capacidad del ser
above this
humano
biospheric level, there is a noosphere,
de
which is
desarrollar la
the human
creatividad, de tener un
capacity to
pensamiento que
develop
puede
creativity
transformar procesos que a la propia
by
naturaleza le llevan
developing
años
thoughts
hacer.
that nature has taken thousands of years
Después
to
tenemos este concepto de
develop.
Bernatsky
Then we have
sobre su documento
Vernadsky's
La Noósfera,
concept on in his work, The Noosphere, in which he posits that man, through his work and conscious relationship with life, transforms the composition of the earth. The biosphere is led by man to a new geological status. The biosphere is in the process of transition to the noosphere. The man creates biogeochemical processes that did not exist before and gives a Vernadsky created an important institution to study the notion, because this was a way to develop, to quantify resources for economic development. And speaking of the noosphere, and my brief time here, he said, he explained how thought, though it is immaterial, can cause change in the material world. How we humans take less time than nature to develop processes that can transform and improve matter, and this is a sign of our condition, our existence. Vernadsky also speaks in this work about the biosphere, book I recommend, in which he said that the man's power is not connected to his matter, but to with his brain. His work is guided by his mind. So these fields have opened for man to be aware of his own, the results of his own work. This state of the biosphere, in which to which we are adapting without knowing it, is the noosphere. He then says that if thought is not a form of energy, how can it transform material processes? This is a paradox to be addressed, and defines the challenge that we have before the youth movement internationally to bring these ideas to bear in the development of policies and ideas which lead to an impact. We see every day. We see that we are undertaking processes that which can lead to war and destruction, but we know that these same processes can help us set the stage for the next generation. I would like the next person I would like to speak about is Lyndon Larouche, who was the key figure in the organization in the creation of our organization. He presents the role of Vernadsky in a document that I highly recommend, which is called Vernadsky and the Dirichlet Principle, which we are reading, and I highly recommend to organize. And the organizers of this event can share with you the schedule and the events that we are planning to further study. The same kind of qualifications that he applies to the distinction between the biosphere and the noosphere, as well as the distinction between the noosphere and the biosphere, are the implicit foundations of any competent approach to defining and governing a real modern economy. Why? Because this function exists between live matter and inert matter, and even the living matter of the human being, which contains a creative function, which the person may choose to develop or not to develop. And this is this creative capability is is tied to this. So Larouche, in his document Vernadsky and the Dirichlet Principle, he takes these concept, these Vernadskian complex, and applies them to the planning of a truly successful economy. It is creative behavior at the time expressed by the corroboree and proof of some universal physical. Such creative behavior is what distinguishes mankind systemically as the conception of the biosphere reflected in the above quotations distinguishes life from abiotic processes. This is key. The capability of the human being of making discoveries which lead to an improvement of society and the productive processes. Their value doesn't come from the products, the product output, but the quality of life of the population.
Is what's essential for our political work today. That the idea of the movement from one level to the other, the advance and the change from the lithosphere to the biosphere, from the biosphere to the noosphere, is exactly the same process of organizing development that we engage in. She said, I want to invite all of you to study in depth the concepts of the biosphere, the concept of creativity, and the required concepts to make sure that we can actually organize a movement that is successful in saying no to war and yes to development. The Larouche youth movement, which is now developing internationally under Helga Zepp-LaRouche's leadership, is in fact organizing around that idea that development, this kind of development that we just saw in the discussion of Vernadsky, is the new name for peace. We have to have a situation where we have sovereign nation states, but they don't function simply as individual nation states, but as part of universal humanity contributing to that greater good. I want to invite all of you again, especially the youth, to join with us with the activities that we're carrying out now. We're carrying out organizing activities on the universities, we're organizing on the streets, and that's the purpose of the international youth movement, which is being organized under Helga Zepp-LaRouche's leadership.
Well, I second that. Please join us on the campuses, and let's recruit this movement that we need. Thank you very much, Carolina. The next two speakers, you will find their work in this spring issue of the Leonora. Of course, you see Anastasia upcoming, who is editor-in-chief, but also you have a fantastic article that was written jointly by Robert Castle and Kynan Thistlethwaite, and so I highly recommend that you read it and get a copy. And Jose wants you to know that he's also in there. But so our next speaker will be Kynan Thistlethwaite, Escaping Tragedy with Shakespeare and Schiller. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I wanted to focus on the question of leadership, true leadership, from the standpoint of classical culture, specifically the works of William Shakespeare and the great German poet and playwright Friedrich Schiller, for whom the Schiller Institute is named after. It's clear we have a crisis in leadership in the nation, which is caused by the lack of classical culture informing an ennobled and informed citizenry. Lyndon Larouche had referred to this problem in a work he wrote in 1982 called The Toynbee Factor in Grand Strategy. He said, in a properly ordered republic, as the forces around Benjamin Franklin and George Washington understood this point correctly, the greatest single source of potential danger to the republic is the very sort of estrangement of the citizen from rational comprehension of national policy issues which prevails in the United States today. The most essential thing for a republic is to develop the citizen into an adult with the qualities of a true citizen. These qualities subsume the ability of the citizen to focus upon and to comprehend in a rational way the great issues of national policy. The entire history of modern civilization demonstrates that such qualities of citizenship can be cultivated in a people in only one manner. That manner is a teaching of classical literary culture, classical musical culture, classical principles of plastic arts composition, and classical principles of scientific thinking, all situated within the frame of reference of a comprehension of national and world history as a process of universal history. The subject of great classical art, the works of Schiller, Shakespeare, Dante, and others, is human society and the role human creativity plays in shaping it. The work of Shakespeare, particularly his tragedies, teach us profound lessons in political leadership and the consequences of refusing to shift axioms. Some of the greatest leaders of this nation utilized the works of Shakespeare to this effect. Abraham Lincoln, in meetings with his cabinet, would often recite scenes from Shakespeare. Was he doing this simply to entertain a cabinet that was drained by the war? Obviously not. In Hamlet, we get one of the most powerful treatises on statecraft and the most well-known soliloquy on the nature of leadership, Shakespeare's Hamlet, that is. This is Hamlet's to be or not to be speech, which is in the third act of the play. Right up to this, Hamlet is confronted with a crisis in his nation. His father has been killed by the current king, Claudius. The nation is in absolute turmoil, and the ghost of Hamlet's father appears to be to him, compelling him to act. Let us now hear the great American statesman, Lyndon Larouche, recite Hamlet's speech.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by asleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks. The flesh is empty. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he might himself his quietus make with a bare bodkin. Who would fathers bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought. And epic prizes of great pith and moment, with this regard, their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. So you now, the fair Athene, nymph in thy orisons be all my sins remembered.
Now, this speech, there's something very wrong with it. And if you can understand what's wrong with it, you can understand statescraft. In just the 4 lines, it's clear, well, I think, that Hamlet isn't talking about simply life or death. For Larouche, in his essay, The Substance of Morality, he says that Hamlet, quote, is confronted by the choice of either clinging to his macho's habitual, petty, paranoid, swashbuckling world outlook, which assures his self-imposed doom, or venturing into a new quality of world outlook, the latter which he rejects as a bourne from which no traveler has returned. There is virtually no difference between that Hamlet and those tragic statesmen today faced with the inevitable collapse and disintegration of the world's present financial and monetary system, who prefer to work within the bounds of adapting as practical politicians to the doomed system rather than risk the escape to safety from the doomed system by adopting what they presently abhor as a radically new form, a bourne from which no traveler has returned, end quote. It is later in the speech, however, that Hamlet actually begins to think about taking his own life in order not to deal with that bourne from which no traveler returns. What's actually required by Hamlet is a complete break from his present axioms to save Denmark, to restore a sense of lawfulness to the country. Instead, he becomes paralyzed throughout the play and only think about what's good for him, not for his country. As we see in the last act of the play, when Hamlet picks up the skull of his good friend Yorick, a court jester that he knew in his childhood, Hamlet remarks how pointless life is. The bodies of Alexander the Great, or Julius Caesar, he points out, have all turned to ashes and are only good for filling up wine barrels. I want to give a complete contrast to Hamlet with one of Friedrich Schiller's plays, Wilhelm Tell, which is a beautiful example of what Schiller refers to as the sublime. Now, for someone to act in a sublime matter, one must be completely liberated from physical dependency, Schiller says. No man must. Now, let's take death, for example. We're all mortal beings. We're going to die someday, probably. So there's no physical security against that. So how does one actually conquer death? You need to have a concept of the future. What's going to come after your death? What will be the result of your actions in life upon future generations? Schiller's concept of the sublime was the basis for action in many of his historical plays. Wilhelm Tell is a great example, and he wrote many other plays, such as Joan of Arc, which Anastasia will be telling you about. But Wilhelm Tell, it deals with the uprising of the Swiss people, which is a proud group of hunters and shepherds against the tyranny of a group of foreign-imposed bailiffs. And actually, there's a very famous scene in the play where the Swiss take up the Rütli oath. I want to just play that out for you now, which the Schiller Institute had featured in a documentary on the poet. So if we could just play that.
Eine Grenze hat Tyranne. Wenn der Gedrückte nirgends Recht kann finden, wenn unerträglich wird die Last, greift hinauf getrosten Mutes in den Himmel und holt herunter seine ewigen Rechte, die droben hangen, unveräußerlich und unzerbrechlich wie die Sterne selbst. Der alte Urstand der Natur kehrt wieder wo Mensch dem Menschen gegenübersteht, zum letzten Mittel, wenn kein anderes mehr verfangen will, ist ihm das Schwert gegeben. Der Güter Höchstes dürfen wir verteidigen gegen Gewalt. Wir stehen vor unser Land. Wir stehen vor unsere Weiber, unsere Kinder. Wir stehen vor unsere Weiber, unsere Kinder.
No, there is a limit to the tyrant's power. I'm sure it reminds you of something. Now, in the play, Tell is forced by one of the bailiffs to shoot an apple off his son's head. He either has the choice of doing it or dying together with his son. I mean, just imagine being in this situation, right? What choice do you have? In the end, Tell succeeds and shoots the apple off his son's head. But there's just one scene I wanted to demonstrate for you, which makes clear how Tell and the Swiss were able to fight so bravely and not be tragic. There's a scene in the beginning between Stauffacher, who is a farmer in the play, who would eventually be involved in the Rotliot, and his wife Gertrude. And they're trying to preempt the crisis. And Gertrude is an example of what Schiller calls a beautiful soul. And there are many women like this in his plays. She gives Stauffacher the moral backing he needs to fight. And she has a great trust in God because they're fighting on the basis of what's right, natural law. It's not just a blind faith in God, but something based on a trust based on principles. I want to now bring my friends Jason, Ross, and Megan Dobrodt, who will now act out that dialogue.
What's to be done?
So hear what I advise. Thou knowest how here in Schweiz all honest men do now complain about this governor's greed and tyranny. So have no doubt that they there yonder too in Unterwalden and in Uriland are weary of oppression and the yoke. For just as Gessler here, there yonder o'er the lake the Landenberger is as brazen. There comes no fishing boat across to us which doth not tell of some new mischief and beginning violence from the governors. Therefore, it would be wise if some of you of sound intent did quietly confer how we might free ourselves of this oppression. So know I well that God would not desert you and would be gracious to a righteous cause. Dost thou not have a friend in Uri? Speak, to whom thou mayst thine heart sincerely open?
I know of many men of courage there, and men of high repute and eminence, who are my trusted friends and confidants. Wife, what a storm of dangerous ideas awakest thou in my quiet breast. My innermost thou bringst from me into the light of day, and what I secretly forbade myself to think, thou boldly speakst with easy tongue. Hast thou considered well what thou advisest? The savage discord and the clang of arms thou callest forth into this peaceful vale, dared we, a feeble folk of herdsmen, go to battle with the master of the world? 'Tis only for some pretext that they wait, in order to unleash on this poor land their savage hordes of military might, therein to govern with the victor's rights, and neath the show of righteous punishment, to extirpate our ancient freedom's charter.
You too are men, know how to wield your axe, and God gives help unto courageous men.
Oh, wife, a fearful, raging scourge is war. It strikes at once the shepherd and his herd.
One must endure whatever heaven sends. Inequity endures no noble heart.
This house delights thee that we newly built, but war, the monster, burns it to the ground.
Thought I my heart to temporal goods enslaved, I'd throw the torch with mine own hand thereto.
Thou dost believe in humankind, but war spares not the tender infant in its cradle.
The innocent in heaven have a friend. Look forward, Werner, not behind thee now.
We men can perish bravely, sword in hand, and yet what destiny will fall to you?
The final choice is left even to the weakest. A spring from yonder bridge doth make me free.
Who presses such a heart unto his bosom, he joyfully can fight for hearth and home, and fears he not the hosts of any king. To Uri shall I post without delay. There lives a friend of mine, Lord Walter First, who thinks the same as I about these times.
Thank you. So that's a complete contrast, right, between Hamlet and Stauffacher. I guess if Hamlet had a wife as devoted and loving as Gertrude and who was a beautiful soul, maybe there wouldn't have been a tragedy. But these are just some of the profound ideas that Schiller and Shakespeare were trying to impart to their audiences on the nature of leadership. And of course, their notions of statecraft must be understood among all of us today. For them, theater wasn't melodrama or entertainment. It was supposed to be a moral institution which would educate their audiences in the most profound and impassioned ideas respecting mankind. We can take comfort knowing that these two great poets have never really died. To honor those that have lived before us, who fought on behalf of transmitting universal physical principles for the advancement of humanity, we must now take arms against the sea of troubles and create a new paradigm which is based on cooperation, economic development, as has been laid out by Helga Zepp-LaRouche in her 10 principles for a new security and development architecture. We should not be tragic, but should venture forth into that undiscovered country from which no traveler returns. Thank you.
Thank you, Kynan. Next we have Anastasia Battle, editor of the Leonora magazine. The sublime overcomes fixed axioms.
Thank you, Kynan, for that very moving speech. It's actually, I made sure to bring tissues up here, so if there are any, if anybody cries, they can just pull it out from underneath here. But I want to pick up where Kynan provoked us, because he did an excellent comparison between Hamlet and William Tell. And in times of great crisis, like now, with the danger of nuclear war, assassinations, and mass genocide happening upon the Palestinian people as we speak, how do you know if a population will respond to the good? Where does that come from, and how do you evoke it? I'd like to pull up the first slide with Helga. That's the last slide that I see up there. There it is. So Helga Zepp-LaRouche, in a speech August 19th, 2001 in Germany, said, "A society which fails to produce leaders who can address these problems in times of crisis will end up like the society of Denmark with Hamlet or Spain with Don Carlos. Whereas if you have leaders like Jeanne d'Arc or William Tell, these are examples where the tragedy can be averted because the leaders acted on the level of the sublime. If the outcome of the future of society depends on the level of quality of leadership, is it not the most urgent, long-time interest of every society to develop the greatest possible numbers of truly adult persons who are capable of thinking and acting on the level of the sublime? Only an education which transmits classical culture gives the individual access and understanding to what the sublime even is. Now, many people I meet when I raise just the word classical, they often paint this picture in their minds of a fat old oligarch. You see a British man eating cookies or something, some elitist. But in fact, those geniuses who harnessed classical artistic composition did so and do so explicitly to end that very system of oligarchy. Your mind, even up to this very second in this room, has been a battleground of ideas. And maybe you're aware of that now. Now, one of the most important forms which we've touched on a bit today is of classical education is classical tragedy. Because classical tragedy can take an audience through an incredibly intense crisis, allowing them to think to themselves, what would I do? Or how should I respond in that situation? It can demonstrate the struggle one goes through in order to have the courage to become sublime. A great example of this is Schiller's romantic comedy, The Maid of Orleans. In this tragedy, Schiller makes alive for the audience the very real French historic heroine, Jeanne d'Arc, a plain shepherdess who takes on the English occupation. Unlike Prince Hamlet, Jeanne d'Arc did not fail to save her nation. In her first soliloquy, the prologue, scene 4, she accepts her mission to save France. Can you please show the next slide? And if you could follow with me as I read, thank you. Farewell, ye mountains, ye beloved swards, ye quiet and familiar vales, farewell. Johanna will now no more o'er you wander. Johanna says, forever fare you well. Ye meadows which I watered, and ye trees which I have planted, green forth merrily. Farewell, ye grottos and ye cooling springs, thou echo, lovely voice upon this vale, which often answer gave to my refrain. Johanna goes, and she ne'er comes again. You do I leave behind forevermore. Disperse yourselves, ye lambs, amid the heather. Ye are a flock without herdsmen more. For there's another herd which I must pasture, on dangers yon field of bloody gore. So hath the Spirit's call to me been given. I'm not by idle earthly longing driven. For who on Horeb's summits once descended, to Moses in a fiery bush of flame, and for the Pharaoh him to stand commended, who one time Jesse's boy of pious fame, the shepherd as his champion intended, who ere his grace to shepherds did proclaim, he spake to me from the branches of this tree, go forth, thou shalt bear witness on the earth for me, on rugged ort shalt thou thy limbs enlace, with steel thou shalt bedeck thy tender breast, nor love of men thine heart may e'er embrace, with sinful flames of idle earthly zest. The bridal wreath thy locks were never grace, no darling child will blossom in thy breast. Yet thee with military honors I shall o'er all earthly woman glorify. For when I the fight the bravest do despair, when France's final destiny draws nigh, then thou mine oriflamme wilt onward bear. And as the rapid reaper cuts the rye, shalt thou the haughty conqueror impair. Thou wilt his wheel of fortune now defy, to France's hero's son salvation bring, and Rheims set truly free, and crown thy king. A signal hath the heaven promised me. He sendeth me the helm, it comes from him. With godly strength his iron touches me, and through me flames the pluck o'er the cherubim. Into the martial throng it urges me. It drives me forth with stormy vim, and field call hear I to me strongly pound. The war horse rears and the trumpet sound. Jeanne is amazingly skillful as a military commander and wins her first battle driving out the English from Orleans. She continues to liberate huge territories of France, but she is suddenly hit with doubt as she is about to slay Lionel, an enemy English commander. She falls in love with Lionel and cannot bring herself to do it. Because she breaks her oath not to fall in love with a man, she loses all of her confidence and her supernatural abilities. In Act 4, Scene 1, she says, "Pious staff, oh, had I never battle sword exchanged for thee, had it never in thy branches holy oak tree rustled me, wert thou present to me never, lofty queen of heaven's sphere. Take, I can't deserve it ever, thine own crown, it take it over there. Ah, I saw the heaven ope with the blessed countenance, yet on earth all is all mine hope, and in the heaven is it hence. Must thou me then with this burden, this so terrifying trade? Could I mine heart this harden, which the heaven feeling made? Wilt thou thine own might proclaim, choose but those who free of blame, stand in thy eternal home, thine own spirit send to roam, who is pure, who will not die, who feels not, who doth not cry? Not the tender virgin hail, nor the herdmaid's spirit frail. Care I for the lot of battles, or the discord of kings? Guiltless did I drive my lambs on the silent mountain heights, yet thou rippest me into living in the haughty prince's hall. Unto guilt my life thus giving, 'twas not my choice at all. I'm sure many people here, especially those who are organizers and have been doing this for many long years, can understand the feeling that Jeanne d'Arc is feeling right now when she loses her confidence. She's filled with doubt, and as she's leading a procession with her white banner, she's accused of being a witch by her own father. She's silent, she doesn't defend herself, and her friends abandoned her one by one, and she eventually becomes prisoner to the English. While imprisoned, she gets word that King Charles, heir to France, is in grave danger, and musters the strength to break her chains, literally break her chains, rushes into the battlefield to save her king. Regaining her supernatural powers, she wins the battle, but is mortally wounded. She remembers her mission to save France, which re-inspires her and makes her stronger than before because she went through this crisis and she overcame. Reality hits Jeanne d'Arc, and she's able to act in the sublime. Now, in the final scene of her death, she says, "Am I really now among my folk, and am no more rejected and despised? They curse me not, they kindly look upon me. Yes, now I recognize all clearly once again. That is my monarch, and that is France's banner. Yet my own banner see I not. Where is it? Without my banner, dare I not come? It was entrusted to me by my master. Before his throne, I must needs it lay down. I may display it, for I bore it true. Do you behold the rainbow in the air? The heaven opened up its golden gates. I, the choir of angels, stand she gleaming there. She holds the eternal sun upon her breast. Her arms she smiling stretches out to me. What comes over me? Light clouds are lifting me. The heavy armor doth to winged garments turn. Upward, upward, the earth doth backward flee. Brief is the pain, the joy shall be eternal. I'm sorry. I told you I'd read these. I'm sorry. In order to have a truly free and moral citizenry, they must have the moral strength to be a citizen. Schiller says, and if you can go to the final slide, he says in his essay in 1793, of the sublime towards the further realization of some Kantian ideas, he says, great is he who overcomes the fearful. Sublime is he who does not fear it, even when he himself is overcome. There's no possibility to achieve the sublime if you are fearful. Some may rush into battle out of a haughty desperation, but the only effect that they'll have is that they're killed. You can train yourself to respond in a moral way. Resolve to accept the mission that's given to you so you can act in a creative, beautiful manner. That's the quality that creates a true republic and a true moral citizenry. That's the mission that Jeanne d'Arc fought for and that I'm challenging all of you to take up as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. Our next speaker is Ashley Tran.
Where's the clicker? Okay. Today at this conference, we have gathered in this hall all people of goodwill from the tri-state area to the rural towns of the Deep South. In watching the live stream, we have attendees from all countries, in all continents, from South Africa, Mexico, China, and Germany, which duly represents the global character of the Schiller Institute. We have all been gathered here because the eyes of the attendees and participants are fastened upon the political drama unfolding before our eyes that we have discussed intensely this past weekend, namely the tragedies at the front lines of the war between Ukraine and Russia, and the 19th month genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza. However, today I request that the audience permit me to turn their attention towards a subject that Friedrich Schiller, the namesake of the organization that congregated us together at this conference, held dear to his heart and believed was one of the greatest gifts that he could bequeath upon his students as a professor at Jena University. That is the moral world of universal history. Now, why in the light of the immediate pressing issues of the world today do Schiller and I request that the audience direct their attention to the past? For those that are unfamiliar, Friedrich Schiller, there he is, besides being a renowned playwright, poet, and philosopher, Friedrich Schiller was also a lover of history. From his friendship with Goethe, another beloved German poet, he received a post as a professor of history at Jena University in 1789. When word got around to the students that his first lecture would be at the university, it became the most coveted class to be attended. So much so that the university had to relocate the initial classroom for the course to the largest lecture hall, which could seat 400 students. Imagine an overflowing auditorium with over half of the students at the university in attendance, where Friedrich Schiller delivered his first lecture on what is and to what end do we study universal history. Schiller posed this question to his students during a time when the winds of history were shifting the sands of time. A new epoch was emerging. In 1789, the year of the lecture, history was taking shape in the Western Hemisphere. In the United States, the American Revolution had been won, and George Washington, our first president, stepped into office. The new U.S. Constitution goes into effect, the Bill of Rights is drafted, and the first United States Federal Congress goes into session in New York City, so just right across the river. The American Republic is born. Simultaneously, across the Atlantic, the French had stormed Bastille, fanning the flames of revolution in France. These events were the immediate concerns of all those that considered themselves a citizen of the age when Schiller gave his lecture. In a parallel age of uncertainty and potential, similar to what we are experiencing today, Schiller begins his lecture with a clear and noble conception of universal history. History is the fabric that binds the destinies of all mankind towards a shared future. Our ability to be in dialogue with history, which remembers all of mankind's wisdom and folly, and to educate ourselves on that basis will determine our fate, for better or for worse. But how do you study history? This is the second question that Schiller poses to his students. You can either take the path of a bread-fed scholar or of the philosophical mind. The bread-fed scholar is your typical tenured professor devoted to learning only in so that it rewards him materially. I'm sure many universities and professors come to mind. During the time of Schiller's university post, he witnessed the same phenomenon. Well-off, complacent, and dispassionate, pseudo-intellectuals, these professors were only concerned with a false sense of authority. They repeated the same diatribes and cliches of their contemporaries in a hive mind fashion, with no reflection of the fundamental premise that these ideas come from. So how do you combat these bread-fed, feeble-minded academic gatekeepers? Schiller says, with the cultivation of the philosophical mind. The philosophical mind is excited with each new insight and opportunity to teach and learn within their field. All minds, no matter how large or small, work for them. Their curiosity is never satiated, Knowledge is as precious as gold, and they protect it as such. The dichotomy that Schiller presents makes it so much more apparent for the necessity of philosophical minds, especially in the study of history. That is, the challenge we find ourselves when reflecting upon the recent wars the U.S. has manufactured on false pretenses and has funded. How did we become a facsimile of the British Empire, the same empire that we fought a war to free ourselves from? Who shall write the history of the American Revolution? John Adams asked this to Thomas Jefferson in a letter in 1815. Who can write it? Who will ever be able to write it? These are similar questions that Dennis Speed has asked the naive and unknowing participants of the Vega for Congress campaign, myself included, during the Friday night Edgar Allan Poe classes at the Bronx office or on the live stream. What is the American Revolution? Who was Edgar Poe really? When confronted with these questions, the familiar patriotic war images that I become acquainted with during my early education of learning about the American Revolution came to mind. The Boston Massacre, Captain Parker mobilizing his band of militiamen on Lexington Common, Washington crossing the icy Delaware, and the death of General Warren at the battle at Bunker's Hill. These depictions of war scenes were front and center of my conception of the American Revolution. Despite the battles and fighting making an essential part of the American Revolution, John Adams characterized the real American Revolution as a radical change in principles, opinions, sentiments, and affections of the people. That the real revolution occurred in the minds and hearts of the people. The war that was occurring was one of ideas, a set that would be developing into a uniquely American character. The emergence of the American archetype was written by Saint John de Crèvecoeur, a French-American writer who rose to prominence for his depiction of the American frontier life and the idea of the American dream with his book, Letters from an American Farmer. The American, as characterized by Crèvecoeur, was a new man. He was independent, opinionated, and needlessly involved with military, economic, and social matters. He was an egalitarian and had a bone to pick with authority figures. Ambitious, resourceful, and literate, he was active in all spheres of business and politics, which carried out to portray a sense of self-governance. He was young and brave through tough conditions by living simply and unaffectedly. The arrival of the American spirit into the European lexicon through this characterization became the site for political independence. The new American could not accept an old oligarchical system of governance in the new frontier. This was the first struggle of the American Revolution, a struggle to achieve independence from an imperial power in the New World. Unlike other wars prior to it, the war for independence was distinguished by its concern for an emphasis on law. Not law that was merely legalistic, but towards a law that would transcend the apparent nationalistic character as stated in its name. The American cause resonated across the world. The shot heard around the world was no exaggeration. It ushered in an era of revolutions on the European continents, as well as in Latin America and eventually Asia and Africa. It birthed a new sense of law that transcended the nation state. The Americans fought for the rights of the Englishmen, who were the named enemies during the war. They believed that the mainland British were just as much to be guaranteed by the British Constitution and for the rights of man as they understood them to be guaranteed by nature and natural law. This sentiment was not merely an idea spewed by American propaganda, but was endorsed by British Whig statesmen themselves, like William Pitt, Edmund Burke, and Charles James Fox. They asserted that the Americans were the champions of English liberties, which was an accepted view throughout the 19th century by historians alike. Despite the images of war that had been popularized in the modern age that we are all familiar with, the American Revolution was immediately understood as a shift for qualification for humanity, especially for those that had lived through every moment of it and had known the great actors. The characters of the great drama of the American Revolution were duly conscious and self-conscious about what they were doing and justified every action with a moral and ideological consideration. The explanation behind such noble personalities was not hard to understand. From the beginning to the very end, the revolution was led by a group of philosophical minds as defined by Schiller, who were not only benevolent and educated, but decent and conservative in their manners. The key players that we know today, Washington, John Adams, Hamilton, Jefferson, Franklin, would be considered to the modern era to be the most respectable and impartial revolutionary leaders, as they were all trained in law and insisted that the revolution must be managed in an orderly and civilized fashion. That the war must be fought according to prevailing rules, and each action must be justified. Fanaticism, anarchy, and lawlessness were condemned, which also became a trait of the emerging new American man, exemplified by someone like Thomas Paine, the author of Common Sense. From the beginning, this band of philosophical minds appealed to the posterity of mankind, confident that time would deliver upon their actions. As stated in Washington's circular letters to the states, with our fate will the destiny of unborn millions be involved. They did not fight for themselves alone, but for all humanity, not for the rewards of the present material conditions, but for the infinitude of the future. It is from the heights of the philosophical mind where we find the spirit of the American Revolution. Now, I know some of you are asking, what does a Chinese woman know about the spirit of America? But that precisely is the spirit of the Republic. Born in America, it became the seed of revolution for the establishment of republics everywhere. Subsequently in Haiti, across the European and Latin American continent, and eventually in China. So in that sense, I am the most American as an American-born Chinese. But where is that revolutionary spirit today? Where are the philosophical minds? It lies in the remembrance of our own history. If the memory of the Republic in universal history remains incessantly in our hearts and minds of all people of goodwill, and all those who consider themselves to be the posterity of humanity, then the inherent revolutionary character of this nation will arise from each of our spirits to continue the fight that our forefathers began. The spirit that we see in the resilience of the Palestinians, the steadfastness of the Chinese, the diligence of the BRICS development, and the shrewdness of the Russians today can remind us of that movement. That same memory can be found at the Washington Monument. If you go to the 10th floor, there's a stone tablet with an engraving by Su Jingyu, a Chinese governor from 1853, venerating George Washington's achievements. Washington was an outstanding man. He led an army and opened up miles of territory, but he did not take the throne as emperor and did not pass the leadership position to his children. He created the law of election so that the whole world would be public. He ruled the country in favor of maintaining good moral customs of the people rather than ruling by force. The United States of America, a nation of 10,000 miles, does not have the title of king and waiter and does not follow the rules of hereditary titles. The power of the state is discussed and exercised by the public, creating a situation that has never been seen before or since. How can the figures of the West, ancient and modern, not be first with Washington? I found this quote to represent my own experience being Chinese in awe of Washington. So let's hold the memory of Washington close to our hearts and carry forth the beauty of our revolutionary history as it is remembered by us and other cultures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Our next speaker is Robert Castle. He's titled his presentation, Beyond Ukraine and Palestine, Recovering the Lost Soul of Our Republic.
Sorry. So there's going to be some overlap between my remarks and what Diane said this morning, and that's probably has something to do with the fact that I've been doing my best to emulate her pretty much every day since I met her. So we have taken upon ourselves the responsibility and the task of articulating the principles that must shape the outlook of an informed citizenry in our nation if we are to survive the policies of depopulation and global warfare that are currently being unleashed upon the world by a transnational oligarchy operating out of the financial centers of Wall Street and the City of London in the so-called special relationship of the Anglo-American intelligence sharing situation that emerged out of the end of World War II. In doing so, we are led to re-examine the actual history of the preceding centuries, and to do so from the standpoint of a sublime moral commitment to action. Doing so, we revive the memory of the martyrs and forefathers and foremothers of our cultures, and particularly the people who lived and died for the universal principles that shaped the world that we live in. Already in 1967, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had spoken the prophetic words in his speech Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence, that the war in Vietnam is but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit. And if we ignore this sobering reality, we will find ourselves organizing concerned committees of clergy and laymen for the next generation. They will be concerned about Guatemala and Peru. They will be concerned about Thailand and Cambodia. They will be concerned about Mozambique and South Africa. We will be marching for these and a dozen other names and attending rallies without end unless there is a significant and profound change in American life and policy. So such thoughts take us beyond Vietnam, but not beyond our calling as sons of the living God. Today, we too must rally our spirits to move against all the apathy of conformist thought, as King put it, within our bosom and in the surrounding world. And today, we too must continue to break the silence. And paradoxically, we are forced, as King was, to move our vision beyond the current testing grounds of the digital age weaponry of the so-called new economy in Palestine and Ukraine. We must look beyond Ukraine and Palestine, not in the sense that we abdicate the responsibility to end the unconscionable crimes of genocide currently being perpetrated, but only in the sense that we must not allow ourselves to be mesmerized by uncertainty in the task of imagining a world beyond the soul-killing legacy of the era of colonialism, which has committed, in fact, numerous Nazi holocausts throughout Africa and Asia in pursuit of its Malthusian depopulation schemes over the past several hundred years in various forms. But who, after all, are we to identify as the purveyors of the outlook which we must supersede as a unified humanity? Many claim, not without a certain degree of justification, that the root of all evil in the world in the past 70 years is planted in the soil of the United States of America. But what is this evil? Where is this evil? Upon a closer examination of our nation's history, one startlingly obvious fact jumps out. We are a nation founded on the Renaissance's principle of the consent of the governed, which implies, as a principle, the American system's developed notion of a Hamiltonian system of national economic self-determination. Note that it was only a little more than a decade before the beginnings of our Revolutionary War in 1776 that the end of the 7 Years' War in Europe saw the rise of a global imperium operating through the corporate auspices of the British East India Company. And it's also worth noting that the British commander who was defeated by George Washington at Yorktown in 1781 was then dispatched by the Crown to India to become the Governor General in 1786. So before and after our Revolutionary War, the United States was a revolutionary movement towards self-determination, while the British Empire was the revival and a global metastasization of an ancient imperial system of usury that treated human beings as cattle to be fed on calorie budgets and killed off, worked to death and killed off according to what the so-called market decides. By emphasizing the role of the British Empire, I do not intend to suppress the role of Americans in the military financial complex project of global hegemonism, but I intend to denounce it and to denounce them, those Americans. In doing so, I self-consciously adhere to the living memory of our first president, George Washington, who in his farewell address was the sternest possible reminder that we have as citizens to remain constantly awake to the necessity of moral principle in statecraft. It's the abandonment of this principle which has led us into the situation that we face today. So these are Washington's words. Can it be that Providence has not connected the permanent felicity of a nation with its virtue? The experiment, at least, is recommended by every sentiment which ennobles human nature. Alas, is it rendered impossible by its vices? It's a real question that he's asking. In the execution of such a plan, nothing is more essential than that permanent inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded, and that in place of them just and amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated. The nation which indulges towards another an habitual hatred or an habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. The fact that this warning has been ignored by a slavish majority of citizens of the United States, that's later, does not make it any less true. Indeed, Washington's words, like King's words 2 centuries later, read like a very prophecy of the situation into which my generation was born. But what I want to stress today is that there have always been patriots in the truest sense of the word, people who consider themselves world citizens with the moral responsibility to bring their nation on a path toward the good of all nations throughout the history of the United States. So I would like to introduce you, for example, to the American poet Edgar Poe. Not many Americans know that Poe was a committed patriot who self-consciously participated in the mental revolution of values that the American Revolutionary War carried through in action. Not many know that Poe was a member of the Society of Cincinnatus, which continues to this day as a patrilineal closed organization of members of the Revolutionary War, named after the Roman general Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, so named because Cincinnatus chose to give up his military dictatorship for the benefit of the general welfare and to not seek his personal profit through that position. Poe's father was an Irish immigrant who was the assistant quartermaster general in Baltimore, who worked with the Marquis de Lafayette during the war. Most importantly, people don't know that Poe was engaged in a decades-long literary battle to establish a new moral, and creative American literary tradition against the intellectual authors of the British Empire throughout his career. Not many know that Poe was a proud adherent of the Neoplatonic humanist tradition that included the likes of the great scientists. Oh, I think I was supposed to put that up already, yeah. Johannes Kepler and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. And it was only through such humanist capacities that Poe developed his method of political intelligence analysis. And I think the influence of Schiller is also worth noting. Poe selected Schiller's poem, The Greatness of the World, as the frontispiece for his personal copy of his magnum opus, Eureka. So it's a poem maybe worth reading because Poe held it in very high regard. And finally, not many know that Poe was likely assassinated for the role he chose to undertake in world history, exposing, denouncing, mocking, and refuting the publications and the mental axioms of the failed outlook of colonial hegemonism and racialist ethno-supremacy, that outlook typified by the terror bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Gaza today. And one interesting note beyond that, something I think that was relatively recently uncovered by some historians working with the Schiller Institute, is that there was a letter sent by President Garfield sometime, if I'm not getting the date wrong, sometime in 1881, written to Poe's doctor, saying, hey, I hear you have some really important information about Poe's death that could help us to write the legacy of this very important American patriot. And we'd like you to come to Washington, D.C. and to give a speech about this, and we can erect a monument for Poe. And that was the year that Garfield was assassinated. So I think the connection between Garfield's death and Poe's, it corroborates the idea that both of these things might flow from a similar conflict. So what I'm trying to drive at is that Poe understood himself as an American citizen to be a representative of the one humanity in his battle against the British Empire. And I'm introducing you to Poe to remind you of the better angels of our nation's history. Because we must recognize as quickly as humanly possible that though the United States has been co-opted into this transatlantic project of global hegemonism, the Constitution was crafted precisely to defend against such an eventuality, particularly its economic dimension, which has been gone through very thoroughly in some of the other presentations. So I just want to give you one example of Poe's very delightful wit. So this is from a story called Some Words with a Mummy, which was published in 1845 in the American Review, which was the magazine which I had shown a picture of. And here we see our narrator. Poe's narrators are usually not someone you want to identify with. An arrogant, gluttonous, unthinking American citizen who goes with some friends to desecrate an Egyptian mummy on the pretense of scientific interest. Once this gang of hooligans have succeeded in reviving the mummy with their futuristic battery, the mummy begins to educate them about their own nation and civilization from the moral standpoint of eternity. So near the end of this dialogue, the following exchange occurs. This is the group talking to the mummy. We then spoke of he's paraphrasing, we then spoke of the great beauty and importance of democracy, and were at much trouble in impressing the mummy with a due sense of the advantages we enjoyed in living where there was suffrage ad libitum and no king. He listened with a marked interest, and in fact seemed not a little amused. When we had done, he said that a great while ago there had occurred something of a very similar sort. 13 Egyptian provinces determined all at once to be free and to set a magnificent example to the rest of mankind. They assembled their wise men and concocted the most ingenious constitution it is possible to conceive. For a while, they managed remarkably well. Only their habit of bragging was prodigious. The thing ended, however, in the consolidation of the 13 states with some 15 or 20 others in the most odious and insupportable despotism that was ever heard of upon the face of the earth. I asked what was the name of the usurping tyrant. As well as the mummy could recollect, it was Mob. Okay, so the tyrant's name is Mob. So what does Poe mean? I mean, people are laughing. I gather they have some idea of that. I can certainly think of a few different fanatical mobs that I've attempted to engage with in a dialectical process. And so, yeah, what I want to say is that specifically, I think what Poe, one interpretation you could say is that what Poe means by naming the tyrant who destroyed the United States of America Mob is the same thing that George Washington said in his farewell address, and it's the same thing that King, the same essential point that King was making in his speech beyond Vietnam. There is a malady in the very spirit of the people of the United States of America. We live as virtual slaves, slaves to our own low opinion of humanity itself, slaves to our delusion of freedom from our responsibility to do good. We don't recognize the independent existence of our own souls. Thus, mob rules. Changing the policy of the United States will never be accomplished by merely complaining voyeuristically about a corrupt, pedophilic, necrophiliac elite. Nor will it be accomplished through terrorism or assassination. It is our responsibility to discover and to create independently the means for the transformation of our nation for the good. The revolution of values called for by King, which is nothing other than the continued perfection of our union, will only be accomplished if a growing movement of citizens of the United States take upon themselves the historical fact that the American Revolution is still happening. So, yeah, this is King. I'll finish with this. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty. But we must move on. Thanks. I forgot I have the honor and the privilege of introducing, and I mean that unironically, a good friend of mine, Jose Vega, who, just briefly, I would like to say, I think is a real artist. And you know, he actually did create a congressional campaign out of a laptop, and he takes after someone else who shall remain nameless in that artistry. Thanks.
I haven't even said anything yet, and I'm already crying. First of all, I want to thank the people who made this conference possible, our tech people over there on the side. Thank you. And I promise I'm not just saying that because I handed my slides in about an hour ago. And I wanted to give a shout out to Nareda Thompson because I believe it's her birthday today. So And to the wonderful translators, I'm so sorry. So I gave them my script, and then I don't know if you can, well, I can't, I'm not going to show you. You just have to read it. But basically, I wrote like 3 pages worth of stuff that's not in what I gave them, so good luck. And before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm really proud that I can look to my left. When I first came around, I was about 15, 16 years old, and I was like the only person under 20. The next youngest person was like almost 40. No offense. This is both of these gentlemen right here. And so I look over and I can see that there are people who have somehow decided to follow me in my campaign for whatever reason, and that we can have a beautiful communication of dialogues and ideas at this conference. And this being the first conference that I get to be a speaker in, it is, I have immense joy and pride to be here. All right. Okay. Thank you. So, with that out of the way, and no more tears, although, oh, perfect, it's right here. Conveniently put it here. So I had dinner with Scott Ritter last night, and I committed a grand sin. I tried to talk to him about poetry. I was reciting to him the famous John Donne poem, you know, no man is an island, every man's death diminishes me, right? And when I reached the famous lines, ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. He said, yeah, I know that. That's Hemingway. I said, no, that's from John Donne. And he replies, yeah, well, no one would know who Donne is if it weren't for Hemingway. And that didn't sit right with me, because the poem was published in 1624. For 400 years, it has survived the test of time. Countless, unknown, passionate souls throughout the century believe that poem must be preserved, taught, and emulated. I don't care what Hemingway has to say. The people whose names we don't know, people who might have died to preserve that poem, are the reason why we know about John Donne. No offense, Scott. And it's a funny thing we don't think about, right? The preservation of art and poetry and music. We look at the paintings at the Met Museum. Some of these things were painted hundreds of years ago, some of them even in the case of 1,000 years ago or so. And these are some of my favorite paintings. Have you ever thought about how these things have been preserved for so long? And what about the people who were making these things during the Renaissance, or during the 12th century, 13th century, 14th century? Did they think that their paintings would make it to the Metropolitan Museum? Did they think they would make it to the Louvre? Did they think it would make it? Do they think that it would have made it to the year 3000, 5000? And I'm genuinely asking this seriously. Now, many people don't know this, and it might sound crazy, but there was a time when Bach was almost intentionally forgotten about in Europe. Yes, the great Bach, whom everyone from nerdy music historian scholars to today's revered rock and roll stars pay homage. They all pay homage to Bach in one way or another today. And even the most casual listener of music, who says they don't listen to any classical music at all, knows the name Bach. See, after Bach's death, a faction in the so-called music world did their best to intentionally forget him. They attempted to silence the beauty. Why? They were claiming that the music that Bach was composing, it didn't need to be so complicated, and frankly, might have been too complex for general population. Now, even my own professor, when I did a brief stint in college, agreed with those who tried to say that. This is a real quote. I have this recorded, by the way, and I sent this to Fred Haight, so he can attest to this. I was like maybe 20 years old or so. He said, polyphonic music is beautiful, but very confusing. Even Mozart, who was born only 6 years after Bach's death, was not influenced by Bach's compositions until the latter half of his life. It wasn't until 1829, okay, a whole other century, that Bach would become mainstream again. Now think about that. Some people here, might be in their 20s. Some people might be here a little older than that. In a lifespan, Bach was not popular, unknown to a major part of Europeans and the world. And then you have this 20-year-old named Felix Mendelssohn, who leads a massive revival of Bach's St. Matthew's Passion. 20 years old. Over 1,000 people could not get in who wanted to get in. The King of Prussia attended the revival. The great German poet Heinrich Heine attended the concert. It was a massive blowout and a success for the 20-year-old Felix Mendelssohn to have made Bach popular again. So why am I talking about this? I was reminded of the immortal Beethoven. Many stories circulate about Beethoven. Some may be apocryphal, some may be true, others are true. The favorite story I've heard is from a rehearsal of the Razumovsky String Quartet, Opus 59. And there's a nice, slow second movement. You know what? I was going to try to hum it. I'm not. And so a cellist who's playing it in the rehearsal, looks up at Beethoven and says, I don't get this. And Beethoven, without missing a beat, doesn't even look up. He responds, yeah, because it's not for you, it's for the future. Now keep playing. See, Beethoven wasn't composing for his contemporaries because he was not limited by his mortal life. He was not a slave to his mortal life. He embodied the immortal poet Friedrich Schiller's idea. And this is an idea that I'm about to quote from the Aesthetical Letters. This is the 9th letter, and I'm going to be reading a translation by Leni Rubinstein. And these letters, by the way, are written as advice to young people. And in this part of the quote, Schiller says, his advice to young people: give to the world on which you act the direction toward the good, and the quiet rhythm of time will bring about its development. You have given the world this direction. If by your teaching you elevate the thoughts of the age to the necessary and eternal, if by your actions or creations you transform the necessary and eternal into an object for their drives, the structure of illusion and lawlessness will fall. It must fall. It has already fallen as soon as you are certain that it is tilting. But it must tilt in the inner, not only in the outer man. In the modest stillness of your heart, nurture the victorious truth. Bring it forth from within yourself in the beautiful, so that not merely thought may pay homage to it, but sense, too, may lovingly grasp its appearance. When I look around the Bronx today, I don't see the same things everyone else sees. I see a long history of people who have shaped the Bronx lovingly in a sublime and beautiful image. I look at Castle Hill in the Bronx, where every street is named something like Ovid Street, Homer Street, or Virgil Street. These same ancient classical Greek poets that would inspire the later revered poets such as Dante and Schiller. What went through the mind of Solon Frank? Yes, Solon Frank is a Bronx native who was born in the middle of the 19th century. What was the mindset of his parents who named him after Solon of Athens, who Lynn referenced earlier? So Solon Frank decides to name these streets after these great Greek and Roman figures, And I couldn't find an explicit justification or explanation as to why, but I didn't need to. One, because with a name like that, I mean, right? But only a great mind would think to name streets after history's greatest minds. Not for his personal benefit, but because he wanted the Bronx to be those sublime ideas. He named these streets with faith in the future that it would prompt someone like me to ask, why Virgil Street? I then think about those who made it their life's mission to preserve some of humanity's greatest ideas. We know of Plato and Socrates because of the Arabs who collaborated with the great Nicholas of Cusa, reviving the Platonic tradition in the 15th century. Let me put up that first picture. I think about Arthur Schomburg. Arthur Schomburg was a historian, an activist, Puerto Rican and African American and German. And if you go to Harlem today, there is a library named the Arthur Schomburg Center. And Arthur Schomburg in Manhattan saw a copy of the Juan de Pareja, which is the next slide, painting. He saw a copy of this in the late 1800s, and he sold 90% of his possessions to take a trip to Spain and Portugal in search of this painting. And he is the reason why here in America we know about Juan de Pareja. He preserved that history. And when you look at this painting that was created in the middle of the 1600s, you don't see a slave. You see a man with dignity. You don't know him, but you know him because of how he looks, how dignified he looks, the way he looks at you. And at the time, to paint someone like this was a crime. And Velázquez did it anyway. And for the record, this year is the 150th birthday of Schomburg, the previous person. We can take the slides down. So, throughout history, it was often dangerous to publish works like those of Avicenna or to do paintings like what Velázquez did of Juan de Pareja. Books have been burned, destroyed, and censored. People killed and persecuted for declaring ideas that contradicted ideas that were popularly believed. The great Einstein, who released his papers on relativity, was initially reviled by the so-called popular science community. Overturning Newton's axioms was not popular, but Einstein wasn't motivated by popular. He was motivated by truth. And despite everything, these ideas survived. So to kind of bring this to a close here, I wanted to first of all just thank the dauntless heroes who strive to keep these ideas alive, even when your time may have rejected you, when they tried to kill you or jail you. To those whose names were scrubbed out of history intentionally to be forgotten, I thank you for allowing these ideas to inspire and stir in my heart that love of divine reason and pursuit of truth. And to people like Alan Salisbury, because without him, the world may have not known the true patriotic Edgar Poe. And through his discoveries of the American system that shaped the future of this organization and the future of my campaign, I thank him too. You know, I recently found out that there were 190 piano companies in the United States in the early 1900s. 65 alone were in the Bronx. The most skilled piano craftsmen sought the Bronx as a place to work. What kind of country could sustain 65 piano factories in one borough alone? The same country that has a statue dedicated to Heinrich Heine in the South Bronx at 161st Street, erected in 1896. I know what the conditions of the Bronx are like today. I perceive in the Bronx the bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. And in the grand scheme of things, this period of despair and poverty will be a small hiccup and will be defined by those who decided to take a stand for the future of mankind. And only when you can see that and understand that will you actually understand the 4th of July, and you can actually understand the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country. As Lyndon Larouche said, the United States of America, the Declaration of Independence, was the greatest conspiracy ever to have been achieved by the greatest minds of all of history up to that point. And it is through understanding that we will continue the spirit of the American Revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Our final presentation is from Jason Ross, Schiller Institute Science Advisor.
Well, as far as the presentation goes, this is such a tough act to follow that I'm not. I just want to really thank the presenters for what you put together today.
You didn't do it.
Didn't do what?
Your presentation.
Stop. I was never going to, okay? No, but look, I mean, do you get this anywhere else? Think about the scope of what we just covered today. We had Plato and the distinction between the senses and causes. We had Kepler and the abandonment of a geometrical attempt at understanding the universe in favor of a physical one. We had Vladimir Vernadsky and the unique identity of the human species as creating states of matter, effects that are non-existent in the purely biological or abiotic domain. We had the tragedy versus the sublime as expressed through Shakespeare, through Schiller. We had the ongoing process of universal history and its role in the Republic. We had the American intellectual tradition recovering the lost soul of the United States, and a connection to universal history and the individual's place in it. So I would like to say, especially to any younger people here, you know, be like these guys, okay? And I'd like to invite everybody, and there'll be more details on this in the next panel, to an upcoming class series that focuses specifically on science from the Larouche standpoint. But again, I want to say this is what the Larouche method of education results in, and it means a movement like no other.
Okay, now we started late, and I am requesting that we go until about 4:30. There's a particular meeting happening at dinner that some people are involved in, which we would go out there at 4:30. But I want to make sure that there's time for questions, and I would ask that we prioritize any younger people in the audience who would like to speak, raise any comments that you may have.
Hi.
You're a young man.
Young at heart.
That's much better. So, I tell people it's not the 4th of July, it's Independence Day. There's a huge difference. And I believe it's Memorial Park, you have JFK, you have General Keane, and a monument that reflects many wars, from revolutionary to at least now it looks like. So my question is, okay, it seems like some of the population is waking up, but the mostly like to complain. So how do we change the minds and hearts of the population so that they basically be active? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Guy. Would anyone like to respond?
I can.
Please do.
By creating a viable alternative that is much more appealing to the death culture that we're currently encircled in right now. That's I think, how you can inspire and uplift people. You have to show people that there's an alternative, and I think one of the ways you could do that is you can read my brilliant editorial in the Leonora magazine. So.
Thank you.
Who's number 2 here? I'll push this down for you a little bit.
It's okay. It's okay, it's okay. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Hugo. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Hugo. I'm a member of the Larouche movement in Mexico, and my colleague Carolina made her presentation. Thank you. Well, it's a good inspiration to see a lot of you guys, especially young people, to show that great beauty in your displays of presentations. Thank you for that. And it's hopefully we will keep doing and working together for a better place. I would like to refer to how the Larouche method helped me to overcome or keep overcoming some false hypotheses and the consequences it could have to assume a false hypothesis, and doing all kind of fancy things, as Adrian was explaining in his presentations, about if we take a false axiom and we do the best to keep that, even if it's false, and the consequences it would have. I find an analogy with that in the energy sector, because I'm an engineer and work in the solar industry, and precisely working with this method of higher hypothesis helped me clearly understand how the geocentric hypothesis of zero carbon, the carbon neutrality, I found a direct analogy between those. It keeps you working as an engineer inside a world of technical issues, doing batteries, working for how to stabilize the grid, how to keep to deal with the intermittency of the primary resource, and all that kind of stuff reminds me of all the kind of fancy things keeping the geocentric model alive. So I find a direct analogy on that. And what I mean is that without this higher hypothesis of Larouche's method, or in the tradition of Plato, we cannot just looking at the senses of what we are doing at our industry, opinions and that kind of things, policy, we cannot overcome if we don't match that the higher hypothesis is that we need to understand that the power system is not just for keeping us alive, but to sustain even a more numerous population. We need to grow in all respects, not only numerically, but in a more dense. We need to increase our density in other ways, basically in a mental way, as you has been exposed in a certain way, and we need to keep this path. So I think that it's very, very important to understand this, and for me, I think it's changing my life. Having understood this, but I'm still keeping in this solar industry to a certain extent. Maybe we will refer later to in the next panel to this energy issue. The question would be if solar power is interesting in certain respects, or maybe temporarily, at least if we don't reach the fusion level. But for the moment, who knows? Maybe we will require further discussion, because there is not only photovoltaics, there are several technologies in this kind, but we cannot blind our eyes before the hypothesis that we need higher density, we need fusion, and this is I would say, the heliocentric hypothesis. And I just want to share this vision with you, because this was one of the main reasons that attached me to the Larouche movement, and keep close in collaborating with you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that. Yeah, I think we should definitely talk some more about what you said. I'd love to hear about your experience in the industry. And I think that will be a topic of the next panel. One parallel that I detected that I'll point out, there's a certain fallacy when you have a false hypothesis that you want to sort of tweak it as little as possible to kind of get get back in the good favor of whatever data set you're looking at. So they had the concentric model, and it's like, okay, this model's broken, so how do we just tweak it a little bit, as little as possible? And then this series of tweaks, builds up this sort of house of cards. And I think there's a similar thing going on with, we used to be, cavemen and collecting nuts and berries, and now that doesn't seem to work anymore. So how do we? But we still want to be as close as possible to that. So we don't want too much industry. We just want to be like sort of still cavemen, but with iPhones or something. That seems to be like what some of these people want to be. So yeah, thank you for that, and let's talk more.
Hello, I'm Anthony Scarpati from Austin, Texas. And my question is, since we have ChatGPT and AI, why even think, why not just ask AI to fix all of our problems? So that's my question to y'all. Do you think we should use AI, to solve everything?
Let me briefly say that we also are very glad to have Carolina Domínguez on via video. And so she'll also be able to participate in this Q&A. Hi, hola. Okay.
Because life would not be worth living if you couldn't think.
Don't let that fool you. She did use ChatGPT to write her speech, so.
There is one more, perhaps slightly more serious answer to that question. Is this coming through? Yeah. There's a book. It's called From Counterculture to Cyberculture. I recommend looking at it, especially if you're younger and consider yourself to be a free thinker who has thoughts about digital technology. Because basically what the book sort of goes through is the fact that when you had this, what an increasing percentage of the population of the United States are coming to understand is a synthetic counterculture that was injected into the population largely through psychedelic drugs, through government programs and other things like that, that the transformation that occurred in the social forms, particularly the formation of communes, there were millions of Americans who moved onto communes in the 1960s, and it was into that decentralized kind of nodal social process which was created through the drug culture, which certain people like Stuart Brand and others injected the literature of cybernetics directly into the body politic through publications like the Whole Earth Catalog, which then directly transformed into Wired magazine, which had this famous editorial about the long boom and the birth of the new economy. So that question, this is why Larouche is unavoidable and absolutely necessary to study, is because it wasn't just the science work that has been emphasized,
the politics, the culture. It was the fact that he was at war with people that were actively trying to dismantle our civilization and successfully doing so. And the AI is one front of that operation, which we are currently, and that's not to say I think that it's all evil, but that when you look at something like the cybernetics literature being dispersed through the communes in the 1960s, you really have to ask yourself who was doing that and why.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Frank. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I have a question, I think, for Jose. So we've learned a lot about the past, present, and future today and yesterday. But I'm a bit curious about the present, at least for when it comes to the youth movement specifically. So what would you say are some of the most exciting things that's happened and might happen coming up, at least what you're able to reveal?
You mean like, what have we done and what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Like what the youth movement's going to do? Well, we just re-announced my congressional campaign. And you know, there's been a sort of long ongoing process right now that was kind of kicked off by launching the initial campaign. But even before the campaign, you know, getting these young people here together and talking about, well, you know, how are we actually going to bring these ideas and not just preach to the choir, but actually get them out into the campuses. And some of the more exciting stuff we do is, of course, when we actually go out into the street and dialogue with people. And so what we need is we need new signs. We need people to come up with ideas that will allow us to have signs that will attract people to come to our table so we can actually start discussions, coming up with polemics. And I think is the most exciting thing about the youth movement is that we're going to be able to go out and talk to people, you know, discuss these ideas directly in the streets like Plato and Socrates did, following in that tradition. Of course, you know, we just did this conference here, and I think the sort of next, well, maybe I shouldn't mention the breakout session. If you know, you know. We'll be discussing more after that, so.
And may I give you an opportunity to respond to this, Carolina? Would you like to give us a report on the activities of the youth movement in Mexico?
Sí, hola. ¿Puedo hablar?
Yes, hello, may I speak?
Yes. Please do, yes.
Okay. Hola a todos.
All right, hello, everybody.
El trabajo de jóvenes que estamos haciendo.
In the youth work that we are carrying out in Mexico, well, not just in Mexico, but other places in the world, this presentation that we have just attended, there were extremely good presentations at a very high level, and referring also to the work in universities, as Jose says, some of the most important and fun things to do is go to universities and talk about these things with young people, because you can have a presentation of idea and perhaps study it, but when you try to transmit it to another person, it cannot be transmitted in the same terms in which you discovered it. It has to respect the ideas of that person, their state of mind, and accompanying them to discover it for themselves. And this makes it sound very easy and I invite you again to participate in this work, because this is how you understand how other people's minds actually work, and this is what we practice in the Larouche youth movement in the universities and other places where we attempt to transmit these ideas. And oddly, there are many questions about AI now that there are so many programs where you can enter schoolwork assignments, and And these are very good applications for university homework, because normally these are very easy things, and they're not real things, where the answer doesn't really matter. But in terms of reality and solving the actual problems we face, you require a quality of not just intelligence, but morality, compassion, and respect for what we will leave future generations. Artificial intelligence does not have that, because it was this intelligence is a gift, God's gift to the human being, and only we can develop it in a voluntary way. So this youth work, we can talk about this, but further, I would invite you to participate. Here in Mexico, we have started something called the volunteering day, and young people who join one day a week when they think not only in themselves, sino in giving, in organizing another person, one day a week. And this has brought about many important events. That is what I can share for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I?
I'm Scott Harper from the Boston area. I just wanted to mention that the question about AI I thought was implicitly addressed really well by the presentation on Kepler today, because the successive iterations of solutions to the problem of orbital bodies were all derived from linear thinking, I think, and the real leap that Kepler makes, that Lynn makes, that any number of people, that every human is capable of, derived from exceeding those linear bounds and making what some might term intuitive leaps, but changes of paradigm. And so I think that example from today's presentation is a good one of the limitations of AI thinking that Kepler managed to exceed.
Thank you.
I'll just add one point to that. One of the problems with the antecedent models is they don't actually reveal anything, because you just add mystery on top of mystery. What is this equant thing? Where is it? You just add more parameters that you don't actually explain. And the AI models today, they're just billions and billions of parameters that have no real meaning that we can deduce at all. We know that the models are useful for certain things, but when you just pile on billions of numbers, it's not clear that you've actually, discovered anything. So yes, thank you.
I just wanted to make a very short proposal. I wanted to thank everyone here, but I think what we've seen should allow us to establish a commission to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our republic. So before everyone gets to their stupid hot dogs and barbecues and all the nonsense that they think is American, I think we should take the presentations here. I don't know if we want to do a pamphlet. We should think of conferences. We should do all kinds of things to take the narrative, because I'm sure most of what was presented here today is unknown to all the people who think they want to celebrate this anniversary. And we have an obligation to make sure the American people know what they're celebrating. That's it.
I'll just respond to you, Diane. You probably already know this, but I've commissioned your husband to write an article for the Leonora celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States, which goes through a lot of the history that we've talked about here and other things as well. So I'm just putting you on the hot seat there, Chris. But it's going to be very good, I'm sure.
And just one addition that would also answer one of the previous questions about what the youth movement is doing. What Jose was referring to in terms of the breakout was that part of the goal of the conference was to gather everybody that sees their life as a part of this shared destiny, not just with the people in this room, but the people in Palestine, in Ukraine, the people that are dying as a result of all these conflicts. We want to gather everybody here that sees their life intertwined with all these people to develop a process of building an international coalition to end all of these wars. And obviously that isn't a clear-cut, practical idea of what's happening next, but it's about engaging in this process. And something that was talked about yesterday was dialogue, and being able to talk with everybody here, with people that we have contacts with. We clearly have some really strong contacts with really high up people, as everybody saw yesterday in yesterday's panel. So it's about how do we come together to utilize all of these tools that we have through the Schiller Institute, through the Larouche organization, through Jose's campaign, through Diane's campaign, and not take that for granted. So I wanted to add that as a part of this commission and the previous question.
Good, and on the theme of the activities of the youth movement, let me observe that on our table over here we have a co-founder of the International Peace Coalition, Anastasia Battle. And so one thing that everyone can do here is to join that coalition on a weekly basis and help us bring that up to 500 and 1,000 people who participate in that process. Because I am certain we'll be having one this upcoming Friday. Now, we're coming to a close. I want to take two final questions. You please go ahead, but let's take them one after another, and then we'll have people's responses to these two questions can serve as our concluding remarks.
Well, okay, yeah, it's kind of a comment more than a question, but, to give feedback, I wanted to say the last couple of days, but just being at the Schiller Institute here, the idea of science, what I've noticed, I was a teacher and also a market researcher and studied the philosophy of education, and where we asked ourselves, what is science? And it took me a while to realize that it's social science. Education is a science. This creating a movement, saving the world, really a movement based in truth and science and discovery. I'm really seeing this as really kind of a perfect curriculum in a way, what Lyndon's come up with. And, right, it's really, you learn so much subjectively as opposed to objectivism. I often say on my International Peace Coalition, people have known me here, my stepfather was an Ayn Rand objectivist. And I'm able to see through, growth and learning, and that it's so important. Hearing what Lyndon says is, this more subjective, learning from the subjective experience of others and history, going back, learning from our ancestors. I know that's a big, I think we learned that from the Chinese traditions, what do we rever, and I look back, I'm descended from Pocahontas' sister in Jamestown as doing the genealogy, but I just noticed looking at Michael Billingsley here, I've learned so much from his books, and just putting myself in the shoes of those of like Lyndon and y'all who have been persecuted for being, most brilliant expository writers there are. So it's an honor to be here and get to know y'all.
Thank you, Ellen.
Hello, I have another question. I wanted to ask two questions, one in English and then one in Spanish, so I'll try to make that concise. The first one I wanted to ask, seeing as with Kepler's systems and models and seeing his predecessors and how they doubled down on the paradoxes and contradictions that came of not entirely addressing the root of the question of why this is and why this as is. I wanted to better understand whether or not you, as a panel, saw or have seen ways that American philosophy and American policy has gone through the same process where we started off with the intention of solving the issues that at hand, but then we ended up just falling further and further into the paradoxical and violent policy and problems that we see as we bastardize the ideas of freedom, the ideas of democracy, and of that sort across the board. Or I hope that wasn't too out of the...
May I ask you to ask your second question again?
And my second question in Spanish was more, I can ask it in Spanish so I could say it directly, but how do I phrase it? For everyone in the room, I wanted to better understand how is it that I'm Latin, my roots are Latin American, how can I better cross culturally and cross nationally connect the work that's being done in Mexico and in Southern America to the people who have immigrated to the United States and are also of Latin descent, and be able to connect the Larouche youth movement abroad and really create the forces that we need to have that kind of praxis and learning process beyond just our national borders. And to say it in Spanish, ¿cómo podemos hacer aquí como vivo en Estados Unidos, cómo puedo mejorar la unificación de los latinos que viven en los Estados Unidos y los que ya son inmigrantes o son los en las generaciones de los inmigrantes, que cómo podemos unificar los movimientos aquí en los Estados Unidos y también en México y América del Sur, y mejorar la transmisión de estos conceptos entre los grupos culturales y con las diferencias que tenemos.
I can translate that second question.
And let's give our brief concluding remarks across the board for everyone who would like.
Or you know what, you want to do it?
In response.
Oh, sorry.
That's why I said I could ask in both languages, because I didn't want to. Oh. Okay. Okay.
Lyndon Larouche had this plan that I've kind of adopted into my own policy proposal called the Space Civilian Construction Corps. And the idea of it is that you would take people who are between the ages of 18 to 26. And every time I say that, I always get arguments as to why it should be a bigger window. For anybody who wants to do it can do it, as far as I'm concerned. And you would put them into these camps for 2 years where they would get an education and they would get a training, a skill, that by the time they graduate, they could be STEM engineers working at NASA. So you would propose this to the immigrants who are coming here. Because if you were to take the entire United States and you mapped it out, you would realize, and you saw everything that was wrong with it and all the national projects that needed to be done and rebuilt, you would realize that you don't have enough people right now in the United States to fix all of it and advance it in a concise way within the next 5 to 10 years. You would need to bring in people from other countries who want to come here. And in exchange for them getting this training, you give them citizenship and you have them build new cities. Suddenly, the idea of being an American transforms already because you have people who weren't born here who are coming here to build cities. And in languages, not just Spanish and English, Russians, Germans, Italians are going to want to come to this as well. So, you know, that's my quick answer.
We're going down. Yeah, I mean, I do think it is worth noting in Larouche's remarks earlier about the formation of a sovereign nation state, one of the preconditions he stated was a single language culture. I think it is interesting to consider that. In terms of a general closing remark, I just want to say that there's a brief passing moment in an essay by Lyndon Larouche where he says, "I have identified what I call the theological implications of the science of physical economy." And my understanding of what he means by that is that if you actually take it upon yourself to develop a concept, a dynamic concept that actually reflects the physical reality of the world's economy, you will be faced with the reality of humanity and the reality of universal history, and through that you will be faced with the reality of God as a principle that is alive within you. And from that point, you have to make a decision about how you choose to live your life within the society that you're born into. And that, I think, everyone in my understanding, having worked with this organization for a couple of years now, is that what was genius about, or a year and a half or something, what was genius about what Larouche really did from the very beginning, seems to me, was that he created a very dynamic, self-reflexive process where people were constantly studying and reflecting on their own role within the organization and within the world at large, and always taking upon themselves the moral responsibility to actually enact those notions. And I think it's just as true today that everything has to be re-examined and reconsidered and reworked through a process of dialogue, particularly between people who are older members who have been around for a very long time, who have a wealth of historical knowledge, and people that were born into this sort of cultural matrix, which if you're looking from the inside of it out, it's very different than looking from the outside of it in. So yeah, that's all I have to say, is that it's, in particular to Carla's question, I think that it's a matter of deciding what you're going to do with your life.
To quote Sun Yat-sen, who was the revolutionary that overthrew the Qing dynasty, he said that knowledge is hard and action is easy. So I think that's what we are, as a cultural milieu, dealing with, the reality of that we don't actually know what we're doing because we don't have a real education, and that's what's really fruitful about being part of the organization. It's a privilege to learn especially about American history, because for me personally, I didn't know, I don't even know a fraction of what most of the people in the organization know about this country, but even just having that understanding completely reframes your own position in your own life, and it is about choosing your own intention and how you want to, and that intention is what moves you towards the action. And so if you don't have a sense of what you want to do with your life, this is the perfect place to know that, and then act upon it. So, yeah.
Well, I can just, I want to say a couple of things. One, why I joined. I joined in 2008, right after the Obama administration was elected in, and I was terrified of both of the parties. I came out of the ghetto, out of the Oakland-Richmond area in California, and I realized that even if I were a good person and did good things for poor kids in my neighborhood, it would never, ever end. And when I ran into this organization and I was provoked, it was actually by Jason Ross, who was the first class he gave the first class I ever went to, and provoked me of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I developed a new idea of what an idea is. So all this stuff that, people are talking about AI and all these different kinds of things, it will never, ever, ever replicate your ability to be inspired, to create, to relive and rediscover great, beautiful ideas. It will never, ever do that. Yes.
I agree.
So my decision to join was, one, because I loved humanity and I was saddened by what was happening to humanity, which I still feel to this day, but two, because I wanted to ensure that every human life had the ability to experience those great, powerful ideas themselves. So that's what I would say in closing, and I hope that you decide to join.
I just wanted to respond to the last questioner, the retired teacher, on this, how knowledge is a subjective process, not subjective in the sense of, well, I can believe in anything you want. I mean, you see where that gets you with Hamlet, for example. But in this sense of mastering these universal physical principles of developing your own creativity, that's what this organization is about. And, it's why when we're often in the field, and maybe some of you encountered the problem in our pedagogical sections in the back room, we often have people double the square. And, a lot of people, they get a little agitated by it, but when they discover the problem, they just think to themselves, well, I should have known that. So that's really the process of creativity, of getting someone to discover a principle. And I mean, when I joined the organization, it was when I was 16. I came in through an institution called the Foundation for the Revival of Classical Culture, which was based on educating young people in classical music, having them sing in choruses, having them do science work in Kepler. And that really gave me the basis to go ahead and join this organization and do political activities. I think that's the real basis for political leadership. And if I hadn't had that, I really wouldn't care what's going on politically. I'd stay as far away from it as I could. Yeah, that's what I would say.
I'll just respond briefly. I think I don't really have any wrap-up comments. I think my colleagues have put it very well. On your question about the doubling down, I think that you basically said it. I mean, look at our foreign policy, right? You can take any of the countries we've invaded, and you can always come up with some crazy counterfactual. We were this close to beating the North Vietnamese, and then we threw it all away, and then use that as the basis to double down on the next one. You can always find some crazy interpretation. Look at what passes for public health now. You can just do, yeah, I mean, I could go on about that all day, but yeah, I think that's a lot of what Mike was talking about was that question of the doubling down versus the breaking of the, sort of like the Jeanne d'Arc, the breaking of chains or axioms. So yeah, you put it very well.
Well, one place I've definitely seen this coming up is in alternative media, the rise of alternative media. And if you're cynical and you could smell a rat well, you're going to be good at your job, right? And that's really a big boost of what's going on. You know, people are in an uproar about what's going on, and it pays. It just increasingly pays. But if you ask these people about the BRICS, about the development in the global south, they have no idea what to say. You know, if they're honest, and if they're really cynical, they'll say, no, it's just the same as the old boss, when they have no idea. So this is just a plug for the Executive Intelligence Review, which, you know, it's not about just getting the facts right, but, and it's not just contempt for others, which is actually including yourself, but it's written based on a love for humanity.
And I'm going to follow that to say, if you can't join us, then open your wallets and help. Carolina, please conclude this for us.
¿Ya puedo hablar?
We can hear you.
Ok, gracias. Quiero comentarles que recibí una pregunta.
I'd like to comment that I got a question about from Equatorial Guinea, the only African country that speaks Spanish, which makes me very happy, because now we Spanish-speaking countries can have cooperation with Africa, with Equatorial Guinea, and they wanted to know, how will this dialogue continue? How can we continue, keep building this cooperation, similarly to the question that was just asked? And I would like to report that we have meetings, dialogues with Larouche, young people cooperating with Larouche, with the Larouche movement on the basis of ideas, not merely in the context of each country, but also on the basis of what our brothers in the United States have presented on a deeper basis. Because once, as you understand the work we're doing, you understand what we're saying, because it is not merely intellectual exercise. If you want to talk about the ideas of the movement, then they turn their back on it, and they slam the door on it. So they start asking us, so how can we get them to listen? How can we get them to understand? So the people that we deal with also receive our writings, and begin a dialogue. But that's the point. These ideas are also a pretext or an excuse to challenge their minds, to inquire as to what they're willing to do, particularly when we approach people in decision-making positions. But this can be achieved through a movement of the population in general, but particularly the youth, because they are forming their moral conscience from between 18 and 26 years of age. It's very important that they do so in that time frame, because if not, it's a little more complicated as they get older, because they acquire commitments, not merely on the monetary or financial issue, but also they begin identifying with the society that they think they belong to. So this is why these conversations, these dialogues are very important. It would be very important if you could join us for one day a week to gather together and discuss with other organizers what things we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina, and we'll continue our international youth dialogues, Carla, which will be an opportunity to, we bring together people from all the nations in which we're active on a regular basis to have these conversations by Zoom. So I have a final, thank you all for letting us carve into your lunch, to your dinner break. I have a final little announcement, which is a good one, which is that for people who are not involved in the dinner session, we have a, pardon me, I just want to read Nancy's note directly. There will be a sing-along of the new Dvorak hate composition of My Country 'Tis of Thee in the hallway outside of the ballroom immediately following this. And so I hope you enjoy that, everyone who's able to participate. Thank you, everyone.